I can't mimic voices for love or money. I'm completely hopeless at it. I was a really bad actor at school.
The accounts are frozen, the transfer has been traced, and the woman who ordered it is not who anyone expected. The morning everything stopped. It started with a phone call, not a press release or a palace announcement, not a carefully worded statement from a royal spokesman. A single phone call, made in the early hours of a Tuesday morning in March 2026, set in motion one of the most extraordinary financial interventions in the history of the British monarchy. The person who made that call was Catherine, Princess of Wales, and by the time the sun rose over Windsor that morning, Camilla's access to a set of royal financial accounts had been suspended, quietly, completely, without any public warning. Staff inside the palace described the atmosphere that morning as unnervingly calm. There were no raised voices in the corridors, no emergency meetings visible to junior staff, no sign from the outside that anything unusual had happened at all. But those who were close enough to the inner circle knew immediately that something had shifted, something that could not be undone. Now here is the first thing you need to understand. Royal financial accounts are not like ordinary bank accounts. They are not accounts that any one person can simply freeze on a personal decision. They are tied to institutional structures, legal frameworks, and authorizations that stretch back generations. For Catherine to have moved against those accounts, she would have needed something very specific. She would have needed authority that had been formally and deliberately granted to her, which raises the question that nobody inside the palace was asking out loud that morning, but everybody was thinking. When exactly did Catherine receive that authority, and why? We will come back to that, because the answer changes everything. But first, you need to understand what triggered this, because the freeze did not come from nowhere. It came from something that had been discovered only 72 hours earlier, something that, according to sources close to the royal household, left even the most senior palace advisors momentarily speechless. A transfer had been made, a significant one, and it had been made to an estate that, as far as official royal records were concerned, did not exist. The discovery landed on Catherine's desk on a Saturday evening. She was at Adelaide Cottage with the children. William was returning from an engagement in the north of England. The document she received was not long. It did not need to be. The figures inside it were clear enough on their own, and the destination of the transfer, once traced by the palace's own financial oversight team, pointed to something buried so carefully that it had avoided detection for years. Sources say Catherine read the document twice. She made 2 calls that night. The first was to William. The second was to a senior legal advisor whose name has not been made public. By Sunday morning, a decision had been made. By Tuesday, the accounts were frozen. Now, the palace has not confirmed any of this publicly. No official statement has been released. No spokesman has addressed the reports that have been circulating in royal circles since late March. That silence is deliberate. It is also, for those who know how the palace operates, deeply revealing. Because the British royal family does not go quiet on stories that are untrue. They go quiet on stories that are true, but too damaging to confirm. And this one, sources suggest, is both. What nobody has fully explained yet is the scale of what was found. The transfer was not a small administrative movement of funds. It was not a routine financial arrangement misread by an overeager investigator. According to insiders with direct knowledge of the discovery, the figure involved was substantial enough that it triggered an automatic review under the palace's internal financial monitoring protocols. A review that led directly to Catherine. It led to the freeze. And a review that, for the first time in years, placed Camilla in a position she had never expected to find herself in. Accountable, exposed, and completely unable to reverse what had already been set in motion. The question now is what exactly was being transferred, and where precisely it was going. That answer begins with an estate that was never supposed to be found. The Offshore estate. Nobody was supposed to find it. Does not appear on any official royal registry. It is not listed under the Crown Estate. It is not connected to the Duchy of Cornwall. It does not appear in any public record of royal holdings, private trusts, or personal sovereign property. As far as the official architecture of the British monarchy is concerned, this estate simply does not exist, and that, sources say, was entirely by design. The property in question sits on the western edge of a private island territory in the Channel Islands. a jurisdiction that sits outside the United Kingdom's mainstream tax and legal framework. It is a place historically favored by wealthy individuals seeking financial discretion, a place where assets can be held, transferred, and restructured with a level of privacy that mainland British law does not easily permit. The estate itself is not small. According to documents reviewed by palace investigators, it spans just over 300 acres. It includes a main residence, 2 secondary structures, and a stretch of private coastline that has never been photographed by any press outlet. Its legal ownership, on paper, runs through a private holding entity registered in 2019 under a name that has no obvious connection to the royal family whatsoever. That was the first layer of concealment. There were others. The holding entity traces back through a chain of intermediary registrations across 3 separate jurisdictions: Jersey, Luxembourg, and a third location that palace investigators have so far declined to name publicly. Each registration was clean on its own. Each one looked in isolation like a perfectly ordinary piece of private financial administration. It was only when investigators began pulling the chain from one end to the other that the full picture emerged, and when it did, the name at the center of it stopped everyone cold. Now, here is where it gets complicated, and here is where you need to pay close attention, because the estate itself is only part of the story. What matters just as much is what was being moved into it and when. Palace investigators believe the offshore estate had been quietly receiving transfers for at least 3 years before it was detected. Small amounts initially. Figures that would not trigger automatic review. Structured, sources say, in a way that suggested whoever was managing the transfers understood exactly where the monitoring threshold sat and was deliberately staying beneath them. That kind of financial structuring does not happen by accident. It requires knowledge. It requires planning. And it requires someone with enough proximity to the royal financial system to know precisely how it operates from the inside, which is exactly what made the discovery so alarming, because this was not an outsider probing for weaknesses in the palace's financial walls. This was someone who already knew where the doors were, someone who had been walking through them for years. The transfer that finally triggered detection was different from the earlier ones. It was larger. Significantly larger. Sources with knowledge of the investigation describe it as an amount that would have been impossible to explain away as routine financial administration. It was moved in February 2026, within weeks of the major inheritance transfers that had already placed the palace's financial oversight team on high alert. The timing, investigators noted, was not coincidental. It appears, according to those same sources, that the transfer was intended to be the final movement, the one that completed whatever financial architecture had been quietly under construction for the past 3 years. After this transfer, the offshore estate would have held enough to function as a fully independent financial base, one that existed entirely outside the reach of the palace's institutional oversight, one that, if it had gone undetected, nobody inside the crown would ever have known about. But it did not go undetected. A junior member of the palace's financial oversight team flagged an anomaly on a Saturday afternoon in late February. She was cross-referencing transfer records against a new internal audit framework that had only been introduced in January 2026, part of William's broader push for financial transparency across royal institutions. Under the old system, the transfer would have cleared without review. Under the new one, it triggered an automatic alert. That alert reached Catherine's desk within 48 hours. And here is what sources say struck her most when she read the full investigator's report. It was not just the amount. It was not just the destination. It was the paper trail that connected the offshore estate back to decisions made inside the palace itself. Decisions that pointed to one person and explained not just where the money had gone, but why it had been moved at all. That trail leads directly into the financial arrangements that Camilla had been quietly constructing for years. Arrangements that, once exposed, made the freeze not just justified, they made it inevitable. Camilla's money trail and the transfer that crossed a line. Every financial story has a beginning, a moment where a decision was made, a moment where someone looked at what they had, looked at what they wanted, and chose a path that could not easily be walked back from. For Camilla, that moment, according to palace investigators, did not happen in February 2026. It happened much earlier, quietly, methodically, in a way that suggested the planning had been going on long before anyone inside the palace thought to look. To understand the transfer that crossed the line, you first have to understand the accounts it came from. Within the royal financial system, certain accounts are designated for the operational expenses of working senior royals: household costs, staff salaries, travel, official engagements, the maintenance of royal residences. These accounts are funded through a combination of the sovereign grant, private royal income, and specific allocations tied to particular estates or institutional roles. They are not personal accounts in the way most people understand that term. They are institutional accounts. They exist to fund a function, not a person. Camilla had access to several of these accounts by virtue of her position as queen consort. That access, sources say, is where the trail begins. Palace investigators found that over a period of approximately 32 months, a series of transfers had been made from accounts connected to Camilla's household operations. None of them were large enough individually to attract immediate attention. Each one was logged under administrative categories that, on the surface, appeared routine: maintenance fees, consultancy costs, estate management reviews. The kind of line items that appear in royal financial records regularly enough that a junior auditor would scroll past them without a second look. But when investigators laid all of them out in sequence, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The transfers were not random, they followed a rhythm, a deliberate, carefully spaced rhythm that sources describe as structured, specifically to avoid triggering the palace's internal monitoring thresholds. Whoever was managing the movement of these funds understood the system well enough to work around it, well enough to keep each individual transfer beneath the level that would prompt a formal review. And they had been doing it for nearly 3 years. The total amount moved across that period, according to sources with direct knowledge of the investigation, ran well into 7 figures. It had been accumulated slowly, systematically, and with a level of patience that investigators found as troubling as the transfers themselves. Now here is what made February 2026 different. Here is what changed everything. The final transfer was not small. It was not structured to stay beneath the monitoring threshold. It was, sources say, a consolidation, the culmination of everything that had been quietly building for 32 months. And it was moved in a single transaction directly into the offshore holding entity, connected to the Channel Islands estate. That transaction cleared on a Friday evening. By Saturday afternoon, it had been flagged. By Sunday morning, investigators had begun pulling the full thread. What they found as they worked backwards through the records was not just a financial irregularity. It was, in the words of one palace source, a constructed exit. A deliberate layered financial architecture designed to move significant royal funds into a structure that existed entirely outside institutional oversight. A structure that, once fully funded, would have given its controller a level of financial independence that no queen consort in modern royal history has ever held outside the formal structures of the crown. That word, exit, is the one that has stayed with those who heard it. Because it implies something beyond simple financial mismanagement. It implies intent. It implies that whoever constructed this architecture was not making a mistake. They were making a plan. And the plan, investigators concluded, had been in motion since at least the autumn of 2023. There is one more detail that sources say made the blood drain from the faces of the senior advisors who reviewed the final report. Buried within the administrative records connected to the transfers was a series of internal authorization codes. Codes that, within the palace financial system, indicate that a transaction has been reviewed and approved by a senior household official. Those codes should not have existed on these transfers. The transactions they were attached to had never been formally submitted for review. The codes, investigators concluded, had been inserted manually, fabricated, used to make unauthorized transfers appear as though they had cleared a process they had never actually gone through. That finding elevated the investigation from a financial irregularity to something far more serious. It was no longer just about where the money had gone. It was about who had the knowledge, the access, and the willingness to falsify the records of the institution they were supposed to represent. And it placed one name, clearly and unavoidably, at the center of everything: Catherine's decision and the authority behind it. There is a question that keeps coming up in every conversation about this story. How did Catherine have the power to do this? It is a fair question. It is actually the most important question in this entire story. Because if you do not understand the answer, none of what follows makes complete sense. And the answer, when you hear it in full, reveals something about the internal structure of the palace that most people outside it have never fully appreciated. Let us go back to January 2026. William had spent the better part of 2 years quietly restructuring the financial oversight framework across royal institutions. It was part of the same modernization drive that had introduced the new audit system responsible for catching the anomalous transfer in the first place. New protocols, monitoring thresholds, and lines of authorization designed to ensure that no single individual could move significant funds through the system without a secondary check. But restructuring a financial framework is only as effective as the people empowered to enforce it. William needed someone he trusted completely, someone with the institutional standing to act decisively if the system flagged something serious, someone whose authority would be unquestionable at the moment it was needed most. He chose Catherine. In a formal but unpublicized authorization executed in January 2026, William granted Catherine co-signatory powers over a specific tier of royal financial oversight functions. The authorization was not announced publicly. It was not designed to be. It was a practical, deliberate internal arrangement. The kind of quiet institutional decision that the palace makes regularly and never discusses with the press. But it meant that when the investigation landed on Catherine's desk that Saturday evening, she was not simply a concerned princess reading a troubling report. She was a formally authorized officer of the Royal Financial Oversight Structure. She had the legal standing to act, and she had the authority to act immediately without waiting for a committee review or a formal palace convening. She used that authority on Tuesday morning. Now, here is where the story becomes even more significant, because Catherine did not act alone, and she did not act impulsively. Sources say the 2 calls she made on Saturday evening were followed by a 3rd call on Sunday afternoon. That call was to King Charles. What was said in that conversation has not been fully disclosed, but sources close to the royal household confirmed that Charles was informed of the investigation's findings before any action was taken. He was shown the key documents, he was walked through the trail that investigators had reconstructed, and he was told, clearly and directly, what Catherine was proposing to do. He did not object. That detail matters enormously, because it tells you something about where Charles stood in that moment. This was not Catherine acting against the wishes of a reigning king. This was Catherine acting with the quiet, considered approval of one, a king who had reviewed the evidence, understood its implications, and concluded that the institution had to be protected, regardless of the personal cost. For Charles, sources say, that was not an easy place to arrive at. He had spent decades fighting for his relationship with Camilla. He had absorbed years of public criticism to stand beside her. The idea that she could be at the center of something like this was, by every account, deeply painful for him to process. But Charles has always, when the moment truly demands it, chosen the crown over the personal. He chose it again on that Sunday afternoon. There is one more layer to this that sources say Catherine had thought through carefully before she made her move. The freeze itself was not designed to be permanent. It was not designed to punish. It was designed to stop the bleeding while the full investigation was completed, to prevent any further transfers from clearing while investigators finished mapping the complete scope of what had been constructed over 32 months. It was a surgical decision, precise, targeted, and completely reversible if the investigation concluded that the evidence had been misread. But Catherine, sources say, did not believe it had been misread, and neither, by Sunday evening, did Charles. What neither of them had fully anticipated was what would happen when Camilla found out. How quickly the news would reach her, how she would respond, and how the confrontation that followed would force the palace into decisions it had hoped to avoid. That confrontation did not stay quiet for long. Camilla's response and the confrontation. Inside the palace. Camilla found out on a Wednesday morning, not from Charles, not from a palace advisor, not from the legal team that had been quietly assembled to manage the fallout. She found out the way powerful people inside institutions often find out when something has gone wrong, through a staff member, a single, brief, almost casual mention that her access to a set of accounts had been flagged under a new oversight review. The words were carefully chosen, deliberately understated, the kind of language palace staff are trained to use when delivering news that could detonate a room. It detonated anyway. Sources who were present in the corridor outside Camilla's private sitting room that morning describe what followed as unlike anything they had witnessed inside those walls. There were no tears, there was no visible panic. What there was, according to those same sources, was something colder and considerably more frightening than either. A focused, controlled fury that expressed itself not in volume, but in the rapid, precise series of phone calls that began within minutes of her receiving the news. The first call was to her private legal advisor. The second was to a senior courtier whose name has not been made public, but who is described by sources as someone with deep institutional knowledge of the palace's financial structures. The third call, sources say, was to Charles. That conversation lasted 11 minutes. What was said inside it has not been disclosed, but those with knowledge of the exchange confirm that by the time it ended, Charles had not reversed the freeze. He had not instructed Catherine to stand down. He had not, in the words of one source, given Camilla the answer she was looking for. What he had given her instead was a meeting, scheduled for that same afternoon, behind closed doors, with no staff present beyond a single senior advisor on each side. That meeting lasted just over an hour. Sources describe the atmosphere inside it as one of the most charged private exchanges the palace has seen in years. Camilla arrived with documents, a prepared argument, a position that, according to those briefed on its contents, challenged both the legal basis of the freeze and the authority under which Catherine had acted. Her central argument was straightforward. Catherine was not the monarch, she was not the king, and the decision to suspend the accounts of a sitting queen consort without a formal palace hearing was, in Camilla's view, an overreach that had no precedent in modern royal history. It was a serious argument, and in a different set of circumstances, it might have carried weight. But Charles had seen the documents, he had reviewed the investigators' findings. He had spent 2 days sitting with the evidence before that meeting began, and sources say his response to Camilla's challenge was not what she had prepared for. He did not argue the legal technicalities back at her. He did not debate the boundaries of Catherine's authority. Instead, he placed a single document on the table between them, a summary of the investigators' findings. The transfer records, the fabricated authorization codes, the offshore holding entity, the 32 months of structured movements beneath the monitoring threshold. He did not speak for a long moment after he placed it there. Camilla looked at the document. Sources say she did not pick it up. She did not need to. She had known, from the moment the freeze was activated, that this piece of paper existed somewhere. She had simply hoped it would not reach that table before she had found a way to get ahead of it. She had not found a way. The meeting ended without resolution. No agreement was reached. No public statement was prepared. Camilla left Clarence House that afternoon through a private exit. Her scheduled appearance at a charity engagement the following morning was quietly canceled. No reason was given publicly. Inside the palace, however, the reason was understood by everyone who needed to understand it. The confrontation had not broken the freeze. It had not shaken Catherine's position. And it had not moved Charles from the place he had arrived at on that Sunday afternoon. What it had done was make one thing absolutely clear to everyone involved. This was no longer a financial dispute that could be quietly managed and contained. It had become something else entirely, something with consequences that would reach far beyond a set of frozen accounts. What this means for the crown, going forward, some moments inside an institution are reversible. A decision gets made, consequences follow, and eventually, with enough time and careful management, things return to something close to what they were before. The palace has survived those kinds of moments many times. It is very good at absorbing shocks, smoothing over fractures, and presenting a composed face to the world, while the real work of damage control happens behind closed doors. This is not one of those moments. What happened in March 2026 was not a misunderstanding. It was not a procedural error that a formal review will quietly correct. It was a confrontation between 2 generations of the royal family, played out through financial architecture and legal authorization, that has permanently altered the internal landscape of the British monarchy. And the woman who altered it was Catherine. Let that sit for a moment. Because 12 months ago, that sentence would have seemed almost impossible to write. Catherine, who spent years being described by royal commentators as composed but cautious. Catherine, who was celebrated for her grace and her loyalty, but rarely for her willingness to move decisively against someone inside her own household. Catherine, who was still completing her recovery from a cancer diagnosis that had shaken the entire country. That Catherine froze a queen consort's accounts, and Charles let her. That combination, Catherine's willingness to act and Charles's decision not to intervene, is the detail that changes everything going forward, because it tells you something about where the real center of gravity inside the palace now sits. It is not with the generation that currently holds the titles. It is with the generation that is preparing to inherit them. William has known this for some time. He built the oversight framework that caught the transfer. He granted Catherine the authority to act on what it found. He did not do those things by accident. He did them because he understood, perhaps better than anyone, that the transition of power inside an institution is never just about crowns and coronations. It is about who controls the systems, who holds the authority, who the institution turns to when something goes wrong. In March 2026, the institution turned to Catherine. For Camilla, the consequences of this moment extend far beyond the frozen accounts. The accounts themselves may eventually be reviewed, assessed, and partially restored, depending on the outcome of the full investigation. That process is ongoing. Its conclusion has not been made public, but what cannot be restored is the position Camilla held inside the palace before that Tuesday morning. The quiet, unspoken assumption that her proximity to Charles protected her from institutional accountability. That assumption is gone. It was removed not by a public scandal or a tabloid investigation, but by an internal process that operated exactly as William had designed it to, cleanly, legally, irreversibly. Sources close to the royal household say Camilla has not attended a joint engagement with Catherine since the confrontation. The two women have been in the same building on 2 occasions. Both times, sources say, the interaction was brief and entirely formal. There is no open hostility. There is no visible drama. There is simply a distance that was not there before. A distance that everyone inside those walls understands, but nobody will put into words publicly. The palace moves forward. It always does. The engagements continue. The statements are released. The public face remains composed. But inside, something has settled into a new shape. Catherine is no longer simply the future queen. She has shown the palace and everyone in it exactly what kind of queen she intends to be. And not a single person who was present for any part of this story is in any doubt about what that means for the years ahead. The accounts were frozen, the trail was found, and the woman who acted did so with the full, quiet backing of a king who finally chose the crown over the conflict. Catherine did not ask for this moment, but when it arrived, she did not hesitate. That says everything.